Hello and welcome back to another edition of GNAT-TV's In-Depth series. I'm Andrew McKeever, the news director at GNAT-TV's News Project. It's a pleasure to have you with us today on Thursday, January 12th. It's also a great pleasure to be joined today by three special guests who are here to tell us a little bit about the state ARPA money, or American Rescue Plan Act money, that is coming Vermont's way. Approximately $1 billion is going to be divvied up around the state to various communities and organizations. That sounds like a winning lottery ticket, kind of vaguely. That'll be carved up and sent out the door from Montpelier. And so here to tell us a little bit about some of that we are really pleased to have with us today Secretary Julie Moore of the Agency of Natural Resources. She was appointed by Governor Phil Scott back in January of 2017, and her agency is responsible for the oversight and management of Vermont's natural environment. Also pleased to have with us today Bill Colvin, who is the Executive Director of the Bennington County Regional Commission. The BCRC, as it's often referred to, works with 17 local governments here in Bennington County to establish and advance regional cohesiveness and policies and coordinate communication between local, state, and federal governments. And we're also very happy to have with us today Leslie Perra, who is the interim town manager of Manchester. She assumed that post last year and is the head administrator of Manchester's town government. So, Secretary Moore, Executive Director Bill Colvin, and Town Manager Perra, really pleased to have you with us today. Thank you very much for making the time for this conversation. Secretary Moore, I thought perhaps we could start with you to give us sort of the statewide perspective on this. So we have all this money coming from the federal government to the state, and I guess I just wondered, what are some of the programs your agency has set up to funnel that money out the door to various localities? What are some of the ways that that's happening?
Sure, happy to talk a little bit about that. So as you noted, Vermont will be receiving just north of $1 billion under of ARPA funds, as we've been referring to them, under the American Rescue Plan Act. And the funds at the state level are being sort of divided up into 5 different types of programs and projects: housing, broadband, climate, water, and economic development. And the climate and water buckets are the pieces that sort of are most central to the work of the Agency of Natural Resources, and water in particular. Over the last 2 legislative sessions, the legislature has worked with the governor to sort of portion that funding out into those buckets, and in the end has committed about $250 million for climate action and $200 million into water infrastructure. When you sort of get under the hood of water infrastructure, we are running a number of different initiatives. One is what we're calling a village water and wastewater program. This is really targeting smaller communities that may not have a community-scale drinking water or wastewater system, but see one as important to their economic growth and development going forward. So helping with technical and financial assistance to develop those programs. We've been working with the 10 or so communities statewide that still have combined sewer overflows. These are historic sewer systems that convey stormwater and wastewater in a single pipe and overflow during periods of heavy rain and snowmelt, including cities like Rutland and Montpelier and St. Albans. We have stood up something called the Healthy Homes Initiative, where we are working directly with individual property owners, low-income Vermonters that have failed wells or septic systems, and helping them replace and refurbish those systems, as well as with manufactured housing communities to improve their drinking water, wastewater, and stormwater infrastructure. And our final initiative is a pre-treatment initiative where we've been working with businesses. Generally, these are in the food and beverage industry that are manufacturing beer or distilled spirits, meat or cheese products, and tend to produce really high-strength waste, which can be incompatible with some of our smaller municipal treatment plants. But if they install treatment at the production facility, it can help ensure that those businesses are able to stay in the communities, oftentimes where they first formed, and not have an adverse effect on the local wastewater facility. So we've put out a series of RFPs. There are some of those opportunities that are open right now even, and others that will become available again this spring for interested applicants to consider whether or not these funding opportunities may be a good mix or well suited to projects they have of interest.
Well, that's quite an amazing list of projects you have underway. I guess I just wondered, is there a deadline by which some of these projects have to be applied for and funded?
Yeah, that's sort of the gift and the challenge of these ARPA funds. They are really intended to sort of help spur economic recovery after the COVID pandemic. And so Congress and U.S. Treasury, who's really working to implement these funding initiatives on their behalf, have told us that all $1 billion need to be committed to projects no later than the end of calendar year 2024. So we've got about 24 months left on the clock, and that those funds have to be fully expended by the end of calendar year 2026. So it's a pretty aggressive timeline for some of the types of infrastructure projects that we're looking to tackle with these funds.
Yeah, that sounds like a lot of time, but when the time to get through building everything, getting everything in place, that's not a lot, as you say. Bill, Colvin, let me turn to you from the countywide perspective here in Bennington County. What are you hearing from some of the local select boards and other town government officials you've been talking to about what they're thinking, how they're thinking of investing this, I guess, once in a lifetime funding opportunity?
Yeah, thank you, Andrew. It's really interesting. As Secretary Moore lists the 5 categories there of funding opportunities, really the Regional Planning Commission, and in particular because we're one of 2 combined regional planning and regional development corporations in the state, we're really at the intersection of all 5 of those categories and touch on each and every one of them. And what wasn't mentioned directly was the money that came directly to municipalities as a part of the ARPA funding. That money went out both directly to municipalities and then the county shares, which went to county governments in other states. But given that Vermont doesn't have county government, a fair amount of that went directly to the municipalities as well. And then given the final rule that was issued by U.S. Treasury, the municipalities were given a fair amount of flexibility about how to spend those funds. And Secretary Moore talked about a blessing and a curse, and really from our perspective that was both a blessing and a curse as well. Blessing because municipalities had a lot of latitude about how to spend this money to decide what worked best in their communities in terms of assisting with recovery. A bit of a curse from the regional planning perspective in that we were hoping with a little more restrictive buckets that we'd be able to work with municipalities to help kind of guide that funding into projects which may have been long delayed, and given other funding available, such as this water and wastewater infrastructure funding, might be able to be stacked up to create some really long desired projects in the community. So we haven't given up hope of that, but it certainly makes the planning for that more challenging when municipalities have kind of received this money with very little strings attached to it. That said, one of the goals of the session that you referenced up in Manchester that we helped to bring together people for with really all of the agencies in the state that have funding, which was really well attended, 60 plus people from a variety of sectors and municipalities. One of our goals there was to get out word about, in particular, programs which might be facing kind of short-term deadlines, and one of them was the Community Recovery and Revitalization Program. And as a result of that, that kind of promotion of that activity, which is a Department of Economic Development program, we did 16 letters of support before the January 29th kind of target date for when the program would be opened up kind of to the larger municipalities, primarily Chittenden County, after that date. So there was about a 30-day period where smaller communities around the state, basically everybody other than Chittenden, was eligible for that funding. There are a variety of categories there, municipal funding, and I'm sure Leslie will talk about Manchester's project, but for water and wastewater, there were economic development opportunities primarily targeted at sectors that were really hard hit by the pandemic. So think leisure and hospitality, childcare, educational services. And in the case of Bennington, within qualified census tracts. So Bennington had a little more autonomy for businesses that exist within one of its 2 qualified census tracts in the state. So I heard as of Friday, there were about 70 applications in at the state for CRRP money. The fact that 16 or so of those came from our region, I think speaks to the value of having the people from the state come down to Manchester and talk about funding opportunities.
Okay, well, Leslie Perra, let's turn to you then on the local front here in Manchester. What are some of the ideas bubbling up that might hopefully or potentially access some of this ARPA funding?
Well, I mean, we've already applied for, we were part of that 70, putting in an application for an extension of a sewer line, which we feel is vital. It goes to new housing project, goes to the town hall, and it goes to a trailer park. It also goes to a new business that has been approved. So we feel it really hits all areas. It hits housing, it hits business, it hits municipality. So we have our application in for that. We're, answering final questions with clarification on documentation or additional documentation with a deadline of Friday to get those in. So we're hopeful that we'll be awarded some monies to help with this extension of the sewer line.
So, Secretary Moore, back to you. Are you satisfied with the pace of the applications that have been coming in? Do you feel that there are enough projects that are asking for money and for support, or is there still a need to kind of get the word out further that, hey, talk to us, we might be able to help you?
So a little of both. I would offer that each of the initiatives we've put forward at this point has seen robust applications. That said, we're always interested in receiving more. Probably the Healthy Homes program is the one that's really front of mind for me right now. We have funding to help, we believe, 700 to 800 landowners, property owners statewide who may have failed wells or septic systems. To date, we've received about 1,500 applications. Some of them, unfortunately, don't qualify because of income restrictions. It also has to be an owner-occupied residence. But we've seen some really challenging conditions that Vermonters are currently living in, and want to make sure we take full advantage of these funds to direct them to the most impactful needs, and don't want someone whose system may have only recently failed to feel like they wouldn't be an eligible applicant. That application period is open and currently runs through the end of January. But we believe there may be thousands at this point of Vermonters who could benefit from financial assistance in helping replace a failed well or septic system.
And do the applicants have to be like municipalities or governments of some kind, or could they be like a private business or a nonprofit organization?
It really depends on the individual initiative. So the Healthy Homes Initiative, we are working directly with individual homeowners. For the Healthy Homes Manufactured Housing Initiative, we have received project applications from manufactured housing communities that are cooperatively owned, that are owned by nonprofits and owned by for-profit entities. the pretreatment initiative, which is dealing with food and beverage wastewater largely. It's mostly businesses that have applied for those grants, but they've done it generally arm in arm with their local municipality who operates the treatment facility. So it really depends on the program. And I know some of the economic development programs have a similar range of potential applicants, from municipalities to nonprofit organizations to for-profit operations.
It's interesting. It sounds, particularly with some of the water projects that all three of you talked about, that has such a bearing on working on solving the housing problem that we keep on hearing about over and over and over again. It's such a major problem. I guess I just wondered, Bill, let me go to you on. Do you think that there's a potential here that these ARPA funds could really kind of be the way to kind of accelerate solving that whole housing crunch that we seem to be in the middle of?
Well, solving seems like a big ask. I mean, I certainly think that it can help move in the right direction. You know, by way of example, we just completed, as part of a reuse study for an industrial building in Bennington, the former Energizer facility, we completed a townwide housing assessment just for the town of Bennington, which showed the need for over 1,000 new or renovated units of housing just in Bennington proper, and the need for in excess of 500 new units in Bennington. And that's a community which is already served by water and wastewater. We know there are kind of these long, almost intractable discussions regarding the smaller villages and the ability to get water and wastewater service to them to help address, housing concerns and build housings in those, build additional housing in those communities. This really is the opportunity to address, those challenges. The ARPA money that came directly to municipalities, the money that's available to incentivize the construction of housing, the renovation of housing through programs such as the Vermont Housing Investment Program, or VHIP, which goes directly to landlords for renovating under housing that's really not of the quality that we want. And then these programs which are available through the Agency of Natural Resources and other state agencies. The ability to kind of stack this funding is the way that we're going to get to solving some of these problems, and in particular in the housing realm. We know in rural places like Vermont, the cost of building housing is many times what one could either get a mortgage for, or in the case of rental housing, what one could charge for the rent for those spaces. We know that the traditional market dynamic simply doesn't work in more rural areas, and that's the challenge we're up against, and why we need to backfill with these other, often what appears to be now, hopefully, once in a lifetime funding opportunities. So now's the chance to really make some real hay on the housing front, but it's not without challenges. And I know that one of the administration's real pushes, and we're already seeing it. The legislature's a week old, but there's going to be a significant push to get capacity out into more rural communities to be able to access and deploy this type of funding. So it's going to be a discussion we're going to see during the legislature throughout the year. There's a pretty strong rural caucus in Montpelier now, which is really advocating for this with the administration's support and promotion, including a possible $3 million ask as part of the Budget Adjustment Act to try to get the ability of the smaller communities to have a fair shake at accessing these fundings. I think that will be helpful in trying to get the funding out to communities which otherwise may not be able to take advantage of it.
Andrew, if I could jump in there for a minute too, I just want to add in that in addition to these ARPA funds, there was also a second piece of federal legislation called the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, or sometimes IIJA, Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. And that is providing further funding for water and wastewater work, as well as a bunch of transportation projects. But so on top of the $200 million that ANR will be administering in ARPA funds, over the next 5 years, we're anticipating $400 additional million under the IIJA that will also be available for water and wastewater projects. And very much to Bill's point, we know that this infrastructure is essential to the types of housing and economic development that our communities are really clamoring for. And first, we need the water and sewer systems to support them. So this is an unprecedented opportunity in Vermont's history. The amount of funding that ANR will be pushing out into these municipal water and sewer projects over the next 5 years parallels all of the investments we've made in the preceding 60 in terms of magnitude.
Town Manager Perra, I wanted to ask you, did I hear correctly that Main Street sewer project that's been a topic of conversation around here for a while now, is that going to be perhaps a beneficiary of some of this ARPA money? Potentially?
That's what we hope. That's the grant that we have applied for.
Right. Because
Yeah.
I know that's been a major talking point and
It
would help
has.
accelerate housing here in Manchester. I wondered how, Secretary Moore, I guess I'm going to go back to you here. How will this all be vetted? I mean, will there be a way of making sure that the money that you push out the door actually winds up doing what it's supposed to do?
Well, each one of the opportunities that the state is offered are competitive opportunities. So we're helped along by the high level of interest in these programs and having a rich set of projects to select from. That said, there are absolutely auditing and other requirements on the back end, along with direct technical assistance from the agencies that are administering the grants to help applicants be successful in these programs. Each one of them has unique criteria. They were developed with an eye towards some of the pandemic recovery metrics that the federal government has articulated, but they also reflect some of the underlying challenges that we're looking to address across the Vermont landscape and how we've elected and prioritized to deploy these funds.
Yeah, I think, Andrew, if I can just jump in as well, it's important to note that the state also has, hired a firm or perhaps firms to help guide it with the structure of these programs to make sure each of these programs is consistent with the federal legislation. So there has been a fair level of vetting before these programs even go out, and then the scoring of those will be done by the agencies, as Secretary noted, in a competitive process. But been a lot of vetting already before these programs even hit the street.
That's true. And we also have what we refer to as our federally funded projects team. And it's an interagency team where we're sitting down ANR and VTrans and Commerce and Agriculture, among others, and looking at all these projects and trying to ensure not only are they of the highest priority, but that we're not helping install a sidewalk in a location where 12 months later we might be coming back and needing to trench in broadband or install a water and sewer project. So just trying to make sure we have kind of as much awareness of the full work of state government as possible, so that all of these benefits from the ARPA funds are additive and not unnecessarily competitive with each other.
Leslie, I just was curious. I wondered, might some of this potentially help out the 301 Depot Street project there, down on Depot Street, where there is a couple of buildings that are being talked about being converted into either commercial office space or housing? Might that be, has that been anything you folks have talked about in terms of maybe trying to apply some of this money there to kind of ease that project along?
We haven't talked about it at all, and I'm not sure necessarily that there's a grant opportunity for that, even though it's housing. There might be. Currently, we have it out for proposal, so we expect proposals back by February 15th. And it's an open proposal process. What would you do with this property and these 3 buildings? And whether it be someone come in and just purchase it, We know Shire's Housing is interested in possibly building housing units in the back. We've asked that it be, the focus is more on housing, but we also have the business community saying we don't want to lose those big buildings either. So it's not been something we've looked at from a grant perspective, but as these proposals come in, we might be able to apply for something.
And these are basically all intended to be one-time expenditures, right? I assume the idea, in theory, is that it would be money to solve a problem, but not one that would be a recurring budget item in future years. Is that correct, Secretary Moore?
That is correct, and that's why the governor has prioritized and emphasized infrastructure investments. These types of capital projects really lend themselves to one-time money.
And I guess sort of a final question before we have to run. There's been so much talk about climate and the clean heat standard. I wonder, is there going to be any application potentially to putting some of this money towards those sorts of projects?
There is. So the legislature and the governor agreed to commit $250 million of this ARPA funding into climate-related initiatives. Chief among those investments is an $80 million investment in weatherization that we've estimated will be sufficient to weatherize an additional 8,000 homes, which would be a huge push for our weatherization programs that annually right now weatherize about 2,000 homes a year. In addition, there's about $20 million that's been set aside to help homeowners improve their electrical service. One of the limiting factors we know in some of Vermont's older housing stock to being able to charge your electric vehicle or run a cold weather heat pump is the electrical service to the housing unit itself. And so that $100 million worth of climate investments intersects directly with some of the specifics of the clean heat standard.
All right, well, we'll have to leave it there for today, but I want to thank all three of you again very much for making the time for being with us today. It's been really a pleasure to have with us today Secretary Julie Moore from the Agency of Natural Resources, Bill Colvin, who is the Executive Director of the Bennington County Regional Commission, and Leslie Perra, who is the Interim Town Manager at Manchester. Thank you, all three. Great to have you on our program, and thanks to you all as well who've been watching. I hope you found our program interesting. And we'll see you again the next time. Meanwhile, have a great day.